No invitation, no entry. Sergeant Tyler Brooks said it like a verdict. His white-gloved hand rose between the old man and the iron memorial gate, flat and final, as if the whole weight of the United States Army had come down through his palm. The morning wind cut across the Virginia grounds with a hard November edge. It moved the flags beyond the gate in sharp snaps of red, white, and blue. It pushed pale smoke from the breaths of the mourners. It carried the low sound of a bell being tested somewhere near the memorial wall. On one side of the gate stood polished shoes, black sedans, dress uniforms, folded programs, cameras, command staff, and families holding grief together with both hands. On the other stood William Harlan, 86 years old, white hair, thin shoulders, a black suit brushed clean but old enough to remember better days. His cuffs were frayed. His tie was straight. His shoes were worn, but shined with the stubborn care of a man who still believed respect began before anyone was watching. In his left hand, he held a yellowed envelope. He did not wave it. He did not push it forward. He held it against his chest, as if the paper inside had a heartbeat. Brooks looked him over once and decided the entire story in 3 seconds. No invitation card. No visible medals. No escort. No family badge. Just another old man with cloudy blue eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who had mistaken memory for clearance. "Sir," Brooks said, lowering his voice so it sounded professional instead of cruel. "This is a restricted memorial ceremony. Family, command staff, approved guests, and press credentials only. Public access is on the west side." William Harlan did not move. His gaze passed Brooks and settled beyond the gate, on the long stone wall where names were carved in clean lines. Somewhere past that wall, chairs had been arranged in perfect rows. A wreath stood beneath a covered podium. A folded flag waited on a small table. Harlan's thumb moved once along the edge of the envelope. "I was told to come to this gate," he said. His voice was low, gravel-worn, not weak, just old in the way mountains are old. Brooks glanced behind him. A line had begun to form. A woman in a black hat slowed. 2 junior officers near the security table pretended not to listen and failed. "Told by whom?" Brooks asked. Harlan looked at him then. "Richard Calloway." The name should have changed the air. It did not. Not for Brooks. To Sergeant Tyler Brooks, General Richard Calloway was a 4-star commander whose portrait hung in briefing halls, whose voice had once moved armies, whose funeral had brought half of Washington into dark suits and solemn silence. Men like that did not send for forgotten civilians in worn suits. Men like that did not leave instructions at memorial gates. Brooks gave a short breath through his nose. "Sir, General Calloway is the reason this event is restricted." "I know. Then you understand why I cannot let you through without proper verification." "I understand what you are saying. That is not the same thing." "No," Harlan said quietly. "It is not." That answer irritated Brooks more than an argument would have. The old man was not shouting. He was not confused. He was simply standing there, rooted in a certainty Brooks could not find on his access list. A black sedan rolled up behind the line. Its tires whispered over wet gravel. A colonel stepped out, adjusted his dress cap, and paused at the sight of the delay. Brooks felt the pressure immediately. "Sir, step aside." Harlan moved half a pace, just enough to let others pass, not enough to surrender the gate. Brooks's jaw tightened. That was when Lieutenant Mason Reed came over from the security table with a clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield. Reed was 26, clean-shaven, and sharp in his dress uniform. The silver bar on his shoulder seemed to give him more confidence than experience. His eyes went from Brooks to Harlan, to the envelope, to the line forming behind them. "What is the issue?" Reed asked. Brooks kept his voice even. "This gentleman says General Calloway told him to come to the main gate." Reed gave Harlan a look that was almost polite. Almost. "Name?" "William Harlan." Reed flipped through the guest list. Pages snapped in the wind. "Harlan," he muttered. "Harlan." He stopped, checked a second page, then a third. Nothing. He looked up. "Mr. Harlan, you are not listed among family, command staff, honored guests, or approved veterans delegation. That means you do not have access beyond this point." Harlan nodded once, as if Reed had confirmed something he already knew. "My name would not be on that list." Reed blinked. "Excuse me." Richard would not have written it down. Brooks and Reed exchanged a glance. It was quick, but Harlan saw it. He had seen that glance his whole life. Men with clean hands deciding what kind of old man stood in front of them. Reed held out his hand. Identification. Harlan reached inside his coat slowly and produced a state identification card. Reed took it between two fingers, examined it, and then held it longer than necessary. William Harlan's eyes drifted past him again, toward the memorial wall. A bell rang once. The sound moved across the grass and seemed to disappear inside his chest. For half a second, the cold Virginia morning slipped. He was no longer at a memorial gate. He was 24 years old, crouched in mud so deep it tried to keep his boots. Rain fell through jungle leaves and hot sheets. A young captain named Richard Calloway was beside him, one hand pressed to a map that had gone soft from water and blood. Men were missing beyond a ridge no map would admit existed. Calloway had looked at him then, young and afraid but trying not to show it. "If we get out," Richard had whispered, "you come find me when it is over." Harlan had answered without looking up. "When what is over?" "All of it." The memory vanished with the next snap of the flag. Reed was still holding his identification. "Mr. Harlan," Reed said, "this ceremony is not open seating. It is not a reunion. It is not a place for personal claims that cannot be verified." The words carried farther than he intended. A chaplain looked over. An older woman near the curb lowered her program. A young captain standing near the rope line turned his head. Harlan extended his hand for the card. Reed gave it back. Then his eyes dropped to the envelope. "What is that?" Harlan's fingers tightened slightly. "A letter." "From whom?" "General Calloway." Reed's expression hardened into the clean impatience of a young officer who believed procedure was the same thing as judgment. "Sir, I cannot accept personal documents at the gate. I am not asking you to accept it." "Then why are you holding it?" Harlan looked down at the envelope. It was yellowed, soft at the corners, sealed long ago, and opened many times since. Across the front, in faded black ink, was written one line. "For the gate, if I am not there to speak." "It was given to me 48 years ago," Harlan said. A faint smile touched Reed's mouth. Not amusement. Dismissal wearing manners. 48 years ago. Yes. And you expect me to treat that as clearance? No. Then what exactly do you expect? Harlan lifted his eyes. "I expect a promise to matter." The small crowd around the gate went quiet. Brooks shifted his weight. He did not like the feeling spreading through the bystanders. Sympathy had a way of making authority look ugly, even when authority was technically correct. Reed heard it too. He raised his voice just enough to reclaim the space. "A promise does not override security." "No," Harlan said. "But a list does not erase one." That was the first line that truly landed. The young captain near the rope line stopped pretending to look at his program. His name was Captain Daniel Hayes. He had served 2 tours overseas. He had stood at ramp ceremonies where nobody spoke because nobody needed to. He had seen men with medals who had never been brave and men without medals who carried whole wars in their eyes. Something about Harlan was wrong. Not wrong as in dangerous. Wrong as in misplaced. A man did not stand that still at a memorial gate unless he had already been through a worse gate somewhere else. Reed did not see it. Brooks did not see it. The clipboard saw nothing at all. Reed pointed toward the west road. "Public access is half a mile that way. There are benches. You can pay respects after the ceremony concludes." The word benches did something to the crowd. No one spoke, but several people looked away. Harlan remained still. His thumb moved over the envelope again, tracing the old crease down its center. Inside that envelope was a letter written in General Richard Calloway's own hand. Harlan had not read it in years, not because he had forgotten it, but because he remembered too much. The paper still smelled faintly of cedar from the box where he had kept it. The ink had faded. The promise had not. Brooks stepped closer. "Sir, I am going to ask you one final time to move away from the primary gate." Harlan looked at him. "I walked with a cane from the east parking lot because Richard told me not to use the west gate." Brooks frowned. "Why would that matter?" Harlan's eyes returned to the ironwork above the entrance. "Because he said I should not enter through the side after what we carried through the front." Reed's patience snapped by a thread. "That is enough." He reached for the envelope. Harlan pulled it back. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just enough. Brooks saw the motion and moved in. "Do not make this difficult." For the first time, a trace of steel entered Harlan's face. "I am not making it difficult." Reed held out his hand again. "The envelope." "No." Brooks's white glove lowered toward Harlan's wrist. Captain Hayes saw it. His stomach tightened. There are moments when disrespect changes shape. It stops being words. It becomes contact. Brooks did not grab hard. He was too disciplined for that. But his hand closed around the old man's sleeve, intending to guide him away from the line. Harlan looked down at the glove on his arm. The air seemed to thin. His voice came out quieter than before. "Take your hand off me, son." Brooks hesitated. Reed misread the hesitation as weakness. "Sergeant, escort him to the security vehicle until we verify his identity." A soft gasp moved through the crowd. The chaplain took one step forward, then stopped. Captain Hayes moved before he fully decided to. He slipped away from the rope line, turned his back to the gate, and pulled out his phone. He did not call security. He did not call the event desk. He called Colonel Andrew Mercer, the man who had served as General Calloway's aide for the last 12 years of his career. The phone rang twice. "Mercer. Sir, this is Captain Hayes at the main memorial gate. This had better be important. The procession begins in 6 minutes. It is, sir. There is an elderly man being denied entry. Name William Harlan. He says General Calloway told him to come to this gate." There was a pause. Not long enough to mean anything. "Not yet." Mercer's voice returned, impatient. "Is he on the list?" "No, sir. That is the problem." "Then security handles it." Hayes looked over his shoulder. Brooks and Reed were moving Harlan farther from the entrance now. Harlan was not resisting, but he had not released the envelope. His face remained calm. That somehow made it worse. "Sir," Hayes said, lowering his voice, "he is carrying a yellowed envelope. It has writing on the front." "What writing?" Hayes swallowed. "For the gate, if I am not there to speak." The silence that followed was complete. Hayes heard the wind around him. He heard a sedan door close. He heard his own pulse. Then Mercer spoke, but his voice had changed. "Read that again." Hayes did. "For the gate, if I am not there to speak." Another silence. Then, from far away on the line, Hayes heard a chair scrape hard against a floor. "Captain," Mercer said, every word suddenly precise, "do not let anyone take that envelope from him. Sir, do not let anyone put hands on him. Do not let anyone remove him from that gate. Do you understand me?" Hayes turned fully now. Brooks had one hand on Harlan's arm. Reed was speaking into a radio. "Yes, sir. Give me his name one more time." "William Harlan." Mercer exhaled once. It sounded almost like pain. "North Star." Hayes did not understand the words, but he felt them. "Sir, stay where you are." The line went dead. Inside the command tent near the memorial grounds, Colonel Andrew Mercer stood over the table with the phone still in his hand. Around him, officers moved through final ceremony details. Programs, seating, press timing, honor guard cues, the machinery of public grief. Mercer was no longer hearing any of it. Across the tent, a framed photograph of General Richard Calloway rested beside a folded flag. In the photograph, Calloway was 72, broad-shouldered, for stars bright on his uniform, eyes still hard with the memory of places most people only knew as names. Mercer looked at the photograph. "Sir," he whispered, "he came." A major beside him frowned. "Colonel." Mercer turned. "Where is General Whitaker?" "At the reef line." "Get him. Now." The major hesitated. "Sir, the ceremony starts in 5 minutes." Mercer's eyes flashed. "No. It starts when this is fixed." At the memorial gate, Reed had gained confidence from the procedure in his hand and the radio at his shoulder. "Sir, you are creating a security disruption during a national memorial ceremony," he told Harlan. "I am authorizing temporary detention until command staff can verify your claim." Harlan looked at him with tired eyes. "I have been detained by better men for worse reasons." The line went still. Reed's face reddened. Brooks tightened his grip, not enough to bruise, but enough for every witness to understand what was happening. The envelope bent slightly under Harlan's fingers. That small bend did what the insults had not. Harlan's composure cracked by a hair. Not anger. Fear. Not for himself. For the letter. "Careful," he said. Reed looked at the envelope. "It is paper, Mr. Harlan." "No," Harlan said. "It is a man's last voice." That line silenced even Brooks. For one brief second, the young sergeant saw something he had missed. Not a nuisance, not a delay, not a civilian with a story, but an old man trying to protect the last thing a dead friend had trusted to him. Then Reed spoke, and the moment broke. "Sergeant, proceed." Captain Hayes stepped forward. "Lieutenant." Reed turned sharply. Hayes kept his voice low, but it carried. Command has been notified. Colonel Mercer gave instruction that no one is to touch the envelope or remove Mr. Harlan. Reed stared at him. Captain, this is my gate. Hayes looked at Brooks's hand on Harlan's arm. Not anymore. The words landed hard. Brooks released Harlan. Reed's eyes narrowed. Who exactly did you call? Before Hayes could answer, the sound came from beyond the parked sedans. Engines. Not one. Several. Fast. Heads turned down the access road. 2 black command vehicles and a military police escort came through the curve, lights silent but flashing against the wet pavement. Gravel spat under the tires as they stopped near the gate. Doors opened with military precision. Colonel Mercer stepped out first, face pale with controlled fury. Behind him came 2 senior non-commissioned officers in dress blues. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. General Thomas Whitaker stepped onto the gravel. For silver stars gleamed on his shoulders. The whole gate changed. Mourners straightened. Officers snapped to attention. Reed's clipboard lowered as if it had suddenly become too heavy. Brooks's mouth went dry. General Whitaker did not look at them. His eyes searched the gate until they found the old man in the frayed suit. William Harlan stood alone, still holding the yellowed envelope against his chest. For the first time that morning, his face changed. Not much. Just enough for those watching closely to see that the past had arrived in the body of a man wearing 4 stars. Whitaker walked slowly toward him. The sound of his polished shoes on gravel was the only sound at the gate. He stopped 3 feet from Harlan. For a moment, neither man spoke. The general's eyes lowered to the envelope, then to Harlan's face. His voice, when it came, was soft. North Star. A tremor passed through Harlan's hand. Not visible to everyone, but Whitaker saw it. Harlan shook his head once. That name belonged to younger men. Whitaker's throat moved. No, sir. It belonged to the man who brought them home. Reed's face went blank. Brooks stared at Harlan as if the old man had transformed without moving. General Whitaker stepped back half a pace. Then he raised his right hand. Not casually, not ceremonially. He raised it with the full precision of a salute meant for one man and witnessed by hundreds. A 4-star general saluted William Harlan at the gate. The air emptied. Nobody breathed. Harlan did not return it immediately. His eyes lowered, almost pained by the honor, as if it had come too late, as if too many men who deserved to see it were names on stone now. Then his right hand rose, slower because of age, steadier because of memory. He returned the salute. Behind the gate, the honor guard froze. The chaplain bowed his head. A woman in the black hat covered her mouth. Captain Hayes stood perfectly still, his eyes bright. Brooks looked down at his own gloves as if he did not recognize them. Whitaker lowered his hand first. Then he turned, not to Harlan, but to Reed and Brooks. His voice remained quiet. That made it worse. Who ordered him moved? Reed swallowed. Sir, I did. Lieutenant Mason Reed. I was following access protocol. He was not on the list. Whitaker looked at the clipboard, then at the old suit, then at the envelope. Lieutenant, there are men who will never appear on the correct list because their service was never allowed to exist on paper. Reed said nothing. Whitaker turned toward the growing crowd. His voice lifted, not loud, but carrying with command. For those of you who do not know, this is William Harlan. The name moved through the crowd in whispers. To most records, he was a staff sergeant attached to a logistics unit for less than 3 years. That is what the paper says. He paused. The paper is incomplete. Harlan's eyes closed briefly. Whitaker did not expose everything. He knew the old rules. He knew some doors stayed closed even after the men who built them were gone. But he said enough. There were missions in Southeast Asia that did not make newspapers. There were pilots, medics, radio men, and reconnaissance teams sent beyond lines nobody admitted drawing. When extraction failed, when radios died, when maps lied, commanders had one hope left. He looked at Harlan. They asked for North Star. The crowd did not cheer. This was not that kind of moment. They simply understood, all at once, that the old man at the gate had been carrying more history than the stone wall behind him. Whitaker continued. Captain Richard Calloway was 27 years old when his team was cut off for 2 nights in country that officially had no American soldiers in it. His leg was broken. His radio operator was gone. His men were running out of water. The rescue aircraft could not reach them. Harlan stared at the ground. The flashback came without permission. Rain in the dark. A hand clamped over a mouth to keep a wounded man from crying out. A compass needle shaking under red-filtered light. Calloway whispering, "Leave me." Harlan answering, "You are not in command of that." Back at the gate, Whitaker's voice deepened. On the third night, Staff Sergeant William Harlan walked in with 2 men and walked out with 7. He carried Richard Calloway the last mile himself. The crowd remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer awkward. It was reverent. Calloway spent the rest of his life saying he owed every star on his shoulder to the man who refused to leave him in the mud. Whitaker turned to the envelope. And that letter is the last order General Calloway ever wrote for himself. Harlan looked up. It was not an order. Whitaker's expression softened. "No, sir. I suppose it was not." He extended his hand, palm up. "May I?" Harlan looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then he placed it in the general's hand. The transfer was gentle, almost sacred. Whitaker held it like a folded flag. Across the front, the handwriting was visible now to everyone close enough to see. "For the gate, if I am not there to speak." Whitaker opened it carefully. The paper inside was thin with age. His eyes moved over the words. For a moment, he could not speak. When he did, his voice had lost its steel. It carried grief now. "This is General Calloway's handwriting." No one moved. Whitaker read only a few lines. "If William Harlan comes when I am gone, do not ask him for invitation. Do not ask him for rank. Do not ask him to prove what this country asked him to bury. Open the gate. Walk him to the front. Let him stand for the men who never could." The words struck the memorial grounds like a bell. "Open the gate." Brooks's face drained of color. Reed stared at the envelope as if it had become a judgment written in ink. Whitaker folded the letter with care. Then he looked at Brooks. "Sergeant." Brooks snapped straighter. "Yes, sir." "Open the gate." Brooks turned so fast the keys shook in his hand. The iron gate unlocked with a hard metallic click that sounded far louder than it should have. But Whitaker did not move yet. He turned to Reed. "Lieutenant, you were not wrong to protect this ceremony." Reed swallowed. "Yes, sir. But you were wrong to confuse suspicion with discernment. You saw age and assumed confusion. You saw an old suit and assumed irrelevance. You saw no medals and assumed no service." Reed's eyes lowered. Whitaker's voice sharpened by 1 degree. "Your duty is security. But judgment is part of duty. Respect is part of duty. You failed both before witnesses and before a man this institution owes more than it can repay." Reed stood pale and still. "No excuse, sir." "No," Whitaker said. "There is not." Harlan spoke then. It was the first time he had addressed Reed without being questioned. "General." Whitaker turned. Harlan's voice was quiet. "He is young." Reed looked up, stunned. Harlan did not smile. "So were we." That was all. No triumph. No revenge. No speech. Just an old man refusing to turn humiliation into cruelty. Whitaker absorbed the words and nodded once. Then he stepped beside Harlan, not ahead of him. "Mr. Harlan, would you allow me to walk with you?" Harlan looked through the open gate. The path beyond seemed longer than it had from outside. Rows of chairs. Uniforms. Faces turned toward him. The memorial wall waiting at the end. He drew in one careful breath. "I came for Richard." Whitaker nodded. "Then we will go to Richard." They entered together. Not with a procession at first. Just 2 men walking through an opened gate. Then the reaction moved outward. A colonel saluted. Then a master sergeant. Then a captain. Then one by one, along the path, uniforms rose. Hands lifted to brows. Civilians stood because they understood standing was the only language they had. The ceremony that had been designed to honor one general had stopped to recognize the man who had helped him live long enough to become one. Harlan walked slowly. His cane touched stone in a steady rhythm. Tap, step, tap, step. At the front row, there had been an empty chair with no name card. The staff had assumed it was a mistake, a last-minute hold from Calloway's office. Now Colonel Mercer stepped forward and placed a card on it with shaking hands. "William Harlan." Harlan saw it and stopped. His lips pressed together. For the first time all morning, the old man looked fragile. Not weak, just human. Whitaker offered the envelope back to him. Harlan did not take it. "Put it with the wreath," he said. The general hesitated. "Sir, that is where Richard wanted his voice." Whitaker nodded. He walked to the wreath stand and placed the letter beneath the ribbon, where the wind could not take it. The yellowed envelope lay against white flowers and dark green leaves. plain and old and more powerful than every polished program in the crowd. The chaplain stepped to the microphone, but Whitaker raised a hand. There was one more thing. General Whitaker turned to the audience. Before this ceremony proceeds, the record will reflect the presence of Staff Sergeant William Harlan, United States Army, retired, call sign North Star, personal guest of General Richard Calloway. The crowd stood fully now. Not half, not politely, fully. Harlan looked at the rows of faces and seemed to search beyond them. Maybe he saw Calloway young again, muddy and alive, grinning through pain because death had missed by inches. Maybe he saw the men who had not walked out. Maybe he saw a ridge under rain, a compass under red light, and a promise carried for 48 years in a yellow envelope. Brooks stood near the gate, still at attention. His eyes were wet, though he would deny it later. Reed remained beside him, face drained of pride. The ceremony continued, but it was no longer the ceremony printed in the program. When the rifle volley sounded, Harlan did not flinch. He had heard rifles in worse places. When the bugle began to play, his hand tightened on the head of his cane. The notes moved over the memorial grounds, thin and pure, and settled into every open space grief had left behind. At the end, General Whitaker escorted Harlan to the wall. Not to the front row, not to the cameras, to the wall. Harlan stopped before one name. Richard Calloway. He stood there for a long time. Then he reached into his coat and removed something small wrapped in a square of cloth. A compass. Its brass case was dented. Its glass was cracked across one corner. The needle no longer pointed true. Whitaker recognized it immediately. Is that? Yes, Harlan said. The one from the ridge. Harlan nodded. Richard gave it back to me after they pinned his first star. Said I would need it again someday. He placed the broken compass at the base of the wall beneath Calloway's name. I guess I do not anymore. Whitaker turned away slightly, giving the old man privacy in front of hundreds. Behind them, Lieutenant Reed approached slowly. Brooks came with him, cap held in both hands now, gloves folded inside it. They stopped several feet away. Reed's voice was barely above the wind. Mr. Harlan. Harlan did not turn at first. Reed swallowed. What I did at the gate was wrong. I treated you like an inconvenience. I treated your word like it had no value. I am sorry. Brooks spoke next. Sir, I put my hand on you. I had no right. Harlan looked at them then. For a long moment, he said nothing. The young men looked smaller without the gate between them. Finally, Harlan answered. You had authority. Reed's face tightened. Yes, sir. Harlan looked back at the wall. Next time, bring humility with it. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Reed nodded once. Yes, sir. Brooks did the same. Yes, sir. Harlan looked at the broken compass, then at the name on the wall. He used to say the hardest part of command was remembering that every name on a list belonged to a life. Whitaker's voice came softly behind him. He said that because of you. Harlan shook his head. No. He said it because of the men we could not carry. The wind moved through the flags again. Softer now. A photographer lowered his camera without taking the shot. Some moments asked not to be captured. They asked to be remembered correctly. By the next morning, the official ceremony record had been amended. Not dramatically, not with headlines. Just one line added where it should have been from the beginning. Special honored guest, Staff Sergeant William Harlan, United States Army, retired. A week later, a copy of General Calloway's letter was placed in the Memorial Archive, sealed with Harlan's permission. The original stayed with the Calloway family, in a cedar box beside the folded flag. As for Lieutenant Reed and Sergeant Brooks, General Whitaker did not end their careers. He gave them something heavier. He assigned them to the Memorial Liaison Office for 90 days. Their job was to meet veterans at the gate, not screen them from a distance. Meet them. Listen first. Verify second. Decide last. On the final day of that assignment, Reed saw William Harlan again. The old man came alone, wearing the same suit and carrying no envelope this time. Brooks opened the gate before he reached it. No words, just the gate. Reed stepped forward. Good morning, Mr. Harlan. Harlan looked at him for a moment, then at the open entrance. Morning, Lieutenant. Reed stood aside. Harlan took 2 steps through, then paused. Without turning fully, he said, You are learning. For Reed, it felt like a medal. Harlan walked the path slowly, past the flags, past the wreath stands, past the chairs that were gone now, toward the wall where names waited in stone and silence. At Richard Calloway's name, he stopped. He stood there with both hands resting on his cane. No cameras, no crowd, no general, no salute, just an old soldier keeping faith. After a while, he looked up at the carved letters and spoke so softly that only the wind heard him. "I made it through the front gate, Richard." Then he smiled, small and tired. "About time you were right." The flags moved above him. The broken compass lay below. And for the first time in many years, William Harlan left the memorial without the weight of an unopened promise in his coat. Respect is not demanded by rank, granted by paper, or proven by shine. Sometimes it arrives late. Sometimes it comes through an opened gate. And sometimes the men the world forgot were the very ones who carried everyone else home.